When King Charles III was sworn in, he was surrounded by clergy, constitutional pageantry, and strict legal tradition. But the men who originally forged this throne, warlords like Athelstan, didn't ask for permission. They united kingdoms through sheer, blood-soaked supremacy. Over the last 1,200 years, more than 60 rulers have worn the English crown. They outlasted Viking invasions, sweeping plagues, and world wars. Take a look at this graph mapping absolute royal power against the last millennium. The trend is a steep, descending cliff. The English monarchy actually survived by systematically surrendering its absolute control.
When we think of the British monarchy today, we see an institution of quiet continuity. We see ribbon-cutting ceremonies, strictly symbolic public duties, and a family bound by the rigid constraints of parliamentary rules. But wearing the crown a millennium ago required surviving a different world entirely. To be king meant navigating constant warfare and sudden betrayals. In the 10th century, routine assassinations were simply the cost of doing business at the highest level of state. The very idea of a unified England was born from this violence. In 937 AD, King Athelstan forged a single nation by slaughtering a combined army of Scots, Celts, Danes, and Vikings at the Battle of Brunanburh, one of the bloodiest days in British history. The lineage that began with these ruthless warlords still occupies the throne 1,200 years later. They survived by trading their absolute authority for the symbolic, restricted roles we see today. To understand the scale of that trade, we have to look at what absolute control actually looked like. When William the Conqueror won the Battle of Hastings in 1066, he didn't just defeat an army, he overwrote the entire country, stripping the Saxon aristocracy of their lands and ruling entirely by military force. This manuscript is the Doomsday Book of 1086. William catalogued every mill, acre, and farm animal in England to extract maximum wealth. These dense columns of handwritten Latin prove the king owned the kingdom's physical reality. Every pig and village belonged to him. During this era, the king was the state. There were no parliaments to consult and no courts to appeal to, only the limits of his own military reach. That image of invincibility began to fail under King John. John managed to lose nearly all of England's French territories and became so entangled in a feud with the Pope that religious services were banned across the country for 6 years, enraging the barons who funded his reign. In 1215, those barons cornered him. At sword point, they forced John to sign the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta established a hard ceiling on royal power. For the first time, the law itself stood above the king, creating a barrier he could no longer legally cross. It didn't strip the monarch of all authority overnight, but it did end the era of unchecked rule. The absolute power established by the conqueror now had a permanent, visible fracture. Over the next few centuries, monarchs repeatedly tried to mend that fracture. Henry VIII declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, attempting to seize total control over his subjects' physical and spiritual lives. But the true collision happened with Charles I. Charles believed his authority came directly from God, and he spent years attempting to raise taxes and govern the nation without ever consulting Parliament. This arrogance sparked a brutal civil war. After 4 years of fighting, Charles was captured and tried for treason against his own people. In 1649, he was led onto a scaffold outside the Palace of Whitehall and publicly beheaded. For over a decade, the monarchy was gone, replaced by a republic. The physical destruction of the king left a clear lesson. If the crown pushed too hard against the limits of its power, the crown itself would be destroyed. When the monarchy was finally restored, the power dynamic had shifted. By 1688, Parliament was so dominant that it essentially fired King James II and invited a foreign prince, William of Orange, to take the throne on their terms. The final surrender of day-to-day power happened almost by accident. In 1714, George I arrived from Germany. He barely spoke English and showed so little interest in governance that he left the running of the country entirely to his ministers.
This vacuum was filled by Robert Walpole, the first Prime Minister. His rise marked the formal handover of executive control from the palace to the Parliament. By stepping back from the unpopular business of taxes and politics, the Crown removed itself from the line of fire. They traded their executive teeth for the guarantee of survival. With Parliament handling the politics, the monarchy adopted a new role. They became the moral and cultural anchor of the nation. Queen Victoria was the architect of this shift. Over her 63-year reign, she defined the morals and culture of the age. While the British Empire doubled in size under her name, she never once led an army or drafted a law. This pivot to symbolism was tested during the Second World War. As London was flattened by bombing, the Crown's power was measured by its symbolic resilience rather than its political force. King George VI and his family stayed in London throughout the Blitz, refusing to flee even as the palace itself was hit. Their presence among the ruins solidified the modern contract. The Crown provides a steady, unbreakable presence in times of national crisis. The British monarchy survived 1,200 years of civil war and social collapse by knowing when to cede their authority. By stepping back from politics, they ensured the Crown remained even as the power within it vanished.